So this is chapter 23, Plant Structure and Function. Okay, for this chapter we're focusing on plants that have seeds, not because the seeds are particularly important, but because these plants are more complicated than algae or simple bryophyte plants. So these plants have cells that are organized into tissues and organ systems, just like animal bodies are. The three organs of all seed plants are roots and stems and leaves, and your textbook devotes a whole section of this chapter to each one of those. So roots, stems, and leaves are organs linked together by systems that go throughout the whole plant. Just like your body has separate organs, but they're all connected by blood vessels, and your skin covers all of the other organs in your body. The three big tissue systems in a plant are dermal, ground, and vascular tissues. So we'll talk about all of those. Dermal tissues cover a plant like a skin covers your body. In young plants, there is one layer called the epidermis. And as the plant grows, more layers are added, and sometimes tough bark is added on the outside. Ground tissue is the name of the tissues that store food in the plant, and it's not necessarily in the ground or underground, that's just the name of the tissue. Ground tissue contains cells that have a large central vacuole inside the cell for storage. Cells that have this are called parenchyma, and parenchyma are found in edible parts of the plant and in leaves. Photosynthesis happens in parenchyma cells so that the sugar can be stored effectively. It makes the sugar and then it needs a place to store it. Ground tissues can also have tougher cells on the outsides for support and protection called collenchyma and sclerenchyma. And vascular tissues support the plant and transport water and nutrients throughout the plant. There's two types of vascular tissues called xylem and phloem. Xylem carries water from the roots up throughout the plant, and some xylem cells contain a compound called lignin in the cell walls, which makes them stiff and strong. Phloem carries dissolved nutrients from the leaves to the rest of the plant. And phloem also sometimes has companion cells that help the nutrients get in and out of the phloem. So vascular tissue is really important. These are two terms that you should definitely remember for this lesson, for this test in the future. You're going to see it in other chapters. So xylem is carrying the water and phloem is carrying nutrients along with the water. And places where plants grow rapidly contain areas of cells that reproduce quickly, and these are called meristems. Specifically, the tips of stems and the tips of roots are called apical meristems. These images here show you the apical meristem at the tip of the stem of a jade plant producing new tissue. The meristems just keep producing basic cells, and then those basic cells slowly develop into specialized cells that can complete important functions. In flowering plants, some of the apical meristems change into floral meristems. And floral meristems are the areas that produce all of the specialized tissues that are found in flowers. So that's everything from section 1. We got a whole lot of new terms in that. So we're just going to do a review question where we go over this idea. So it's going to come up as a poll here in a second. Okay, so we're looking for which of the following are not a tissue that is found throughout the roots, stems, and leaves. And I might have messed this poll up. If you're here live, you might only see the option to choose one answer, and it's supposed to be two, but I think I put it in as the wrong question type. So if that's the case, just choose one answer that you think is correct. So which are not found throughout the entire plant, leaves, stems, and roots? So it should see it on your screen now, the option to answer. Please answer the poll, even if you're not sure if you have the right answer. Again, I can't see exactly what you said. I can only see the group's results as a whole. All right, 100% voted. Good job, group. Okay, so we've got answers of dermal, ground, and chlorophyll. Well, let's see. All right, our tissues that are found throughout the roots, stems, and leaves, the ones that are vascular, dermal, and ground. So the ones that are not are apical meristem. Those are only found at the tips of roots and the tips of stems. And chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is not a tissue, and it's also not found in the roots. So no, somebody said chlorophyll. Good job. I think that ground is a tricky one because you look at that and you might think, well, it's only in the roots, right? It's underground. That's not what ground tissue means in this case. So ground is one of them that's found throughout the whole plant, even in the leaves and the stem. And dermal tissue covers the entire plant. So the outside of the roots and the outside of the stem and the outside of the leaves, they all have some sort of dermal tissue. Okay, we're going to move on to section 2. And remember, I will send everybody a video that is a recording of this. So if I'm moving too fast for you, you can definitely ask for questions if you need me to go over something again. But you could also just watch the video and pause it, slow it down, rewatch any parts that you need. So section 2 is about roots. And roots have several jobs. They anchor the plant and keep it upright. They absorb water and nutrients from the soil. They begin the transport of those nutrients into the rest of the plant. And sometimes they also store food for the plant. Roots grow quickly and spread out to increase the surface area that's absorbing water and nutrients into the plant. So as the plant grows, it needs more water and it needs more nutrients. So the roots have to grow so that they can take in more water and nutrients. So there's kind of two methods that plants use to do this, two basic types of root systems. One is a taproot system, where the plant has one really big root going down in the center with little tiny roots growing off of it. And other plants have a fibrous root system that has many roots that are about the same size. So different plants use different strategies for collecting the water and nutrients that they need. And we can look at the anatomy of a root. Roots contain dermal tissue on the outside and ground tissue and vascular tissue in the middle. Root hairs are on the epidermis. They increase the surface area that can take in water and nutrients. So they're just more dermal tissue to soak things up. A root cap is a tough portion on the very tip of the root. Its job is to protect the apical meristem as it grows, um, just to add a layer of protection that's really tough, and it protects it as the root shoves its way through the soil. And then a layer called the endodermis is ground tissue that surrounds the vascular tissue and helps it do its job. So in general, on the outsides, we have dermal tissue here. Then we have ground tissue in the middle. And then the red and yellow ones here in the middle are vascular tissue, and they're kind of surrounded by more ground tissue to help them out, the endodermis. And down here you can see this is the root cap, where there's not really anything going on. It's just a tough area that's to shove its way through the dirt and rocks without letting the rest of the root get hurt. So one of the jobs of roots is to take in nutrients and water. So how do nutrients get from the soil into the parts of the plant that need them? Well, water moves into the root by osmosis. So we learned about that in an earlier chapter. If there's a higher concentration of water outside the cell than inside of the cell, the water will move inward. The nutrients, active transport is a way to use energy to move the nutrients from the soil into the epidermis. So active transport was also in an earlier chapter. And once they're inside the root in the epidermis, water and nutrients move from the epidermis into the vascular tissue. They're pumped through an area that's waterproof so that the water can't go anywhere else but into that vascular tissue, and it can't go backwards into the root. So this pumping of the water in one direction creates root pressure. As more water is pumped in from the roots to the vascular tissue, the pressure forces the water upward. So this is the start of the water and the nutrients with it being forced into the rest of the plant. The root pressure begins to force it upward. And we'll learn a little bit more about how that works. But first, to finish up roots, I want to talk about the nutrients and this chart. So each nutrient has a different role in the plant. And on page 558 in your textbook, there's a chart showing 5 different nutrients, telling what they do in the plant and what happens to the plant if it doesn't get enough of that specific nutrient. So I would recommend bookmarking this page, 558, so that you have that chart for future reference. And that actually brings us to the end of the section on roots, section 2. So we have another review question. Which of the following is not a function of roots? So you should see that poll on your screen. Three of these are correct functions of roots. We're looking for the one that is not. So just click the answer that you think is not a function of roots. Awesome, 100%. Thanks again for that. All right, and 100% of you got the right answer. Awesome. Give yourself a round of applause. So the first 3, anchor the plant, keep it upright, begin transporting nutrients, sometimes storing food, those are all things that roots do. And the last one, sending water and nutrients from the plant back into the soil, is not it. All right, the roots do the opposite. They take the water and nutrients from the soil and use it in the plant. All right, so good job on that one. We're going to jump right into section 3 about stems. So stems support the plant. They have vascular tissues which carry the water and nutrients throughout the plant, and they produce the leaves and reproductive organs of the plant. And note by this definition, the trunks and branches of trees are considered stems. So we tend to think of them as just, the green parts of flowers, that kind of thing. But the trunks and branches of trees are also fulfilling the roles of stems. Oh, there we go. So parts of the stem. Inside are clusters of xylem and phloem. Remember, those are the vascular tissues. The xylem carries water up from the roots, and the phloem carries water and nutrients. So those are all clustered together inside the stem in clusters that we call vascular bundles. The outside of the stem is epidermal tissue, and that's often covered in an extra layer of wax to help protect it. And then out of this epidermal tissue, leaves grow from the stem in areas called nodes. Um, so nodes are the areas from which the leaves grow, and the nodes have apical meristems on them, and they're called buds. New stems and leaves grow from the buds. So a bud that is currently growing new leaves off of it can look like this. And plants grow in two ways. So from the apical meristem, when the plant's height is lengthened, this is called primary growth. And you can see primary growth in this picture as the light green areas on the tips of these branches. But as this happens, as the plant grows taller, the stem must get more supportive to be able to hold the plant up as it's getting heavier. And the stem's going to need more vascular tissues in it to be able to supply the whole plant with nutrients and water. So the stem gets thicker. And getting thicker is called secondary growth. You can see that when you look at the rings in a tree. Each ring in the trunk of the tree shows a year of secondary growth. So let's look at that secondary growth a little bit more. Secondary growth in trees, each year the vascular cambium produces a new layer of xylem, which is what makes up wood. So vascular cambium is just an area in the stem of the tree, um, but it's important to remember that it's producing xylem every year, and that's what wood is made up of. So this is why trees have rings. If you cut down a tree or cut open a log, you see rings going around the whole thing, and what that is a new layer of xylem being produced every year. As the tree goes wider, the wood in the center stops allowing water to go through it, and this is called heartwood. So that's this dark area on the image here. There's not water flowing through there anymore. It's just leftover dead xylem, but it's holding up the tree, making it strong. And then outside of it, the layers of active xylem that are still having water flow through it, that is called sapwood. And that is actually all that we have about stems. So we've got one more review question about that section. So we've got, this question has two fill in the blanks here. So as trees grow wider, blank growth happens in the vascular cambium surrounding the blank in the center of the trunk. So your answers all have two blanks to fill in. So your poll should be on your screen now. I'll give you a few seconds to click on the answers that you think is correct. All right, and we got 100% excuse me, 100% participation again, and it looks like everybody got the first part of it right. So our correct answer is secondary growth. So everybody selected an option that's secondary growth, so that's good. I'm just going to put an S here for secondary. So as the tree's growing wider, that's secondary growth, and it's surrounding the heartwood in the center of the trunk. I'll just put an H there for heartwood. Oops. Um, so as we saw on the previous screen, the heartwood is in the center, the sapwood is around it. This option, dermis, that's not correct because dermis is always on the outside. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about the trunk, the stem, the roots, the leaves. The dermis or dermal layer is always on the very outside. So we're talking about the heartwood being in the center. But good job for everybody picking secondary as the type of growth. Oh, yeah, that's the correct answer, secondary and heartwood. Okay, next section is about leaves. Leaves are organs in which photosynthesis happens. They let carbon dioxide into the plant and they let oxygen out of the plant, and they also produce other things needed by the plant, starches and oils that the plant needs. So they're kind of the factory for the plant. They let everything happen there. So the tissues in a leaf are basically the epidermis on the outside, which is protected. It's covered in a layer of wax. That's kind of this clear layer shown on the picture here. The middle is called the mesophyll, and that's where the photosynthesis happens and everything else happens, really. And then another layer on the outside is another epidermis. So it's kind of a sandwich. You have the epidermis on the top and bottom, mesophyll in the middle. There's also xylem and phloem running through the leaves. They run through the leaf in veins. So when you look at most leaves, you see branching veins in the middle of them. That's actually just the xylem and phloem being able to reach the whole leaf. Leaves have openings in them called stomata that allow carbon dioxide and oxygen to flow in, or I'm sorry, in and out. They allow carbon dioxide to flow in, oxygen to flow out, and water vapor to also leave the leaves in a process called transpiration. So let's talk about that because it's very, very important. Transpiration is very important, but it keeps the water flowing through the plant, which is necessary, but it's also a problem. Losing too much water through transpiration is a big problem for the plants. Plants need to maintain the water pressure in their leaves and stems. Without enough water, they will wilt. So there are guard cells around the stomata. So that's these light-colored cells in this image. Those are the guard cells. When the leaf has enough water pressure, the guard cells open and that allows transpiration to happen. Okay, so the water will be able to evaporate out of the cell when it's open. So when there's enough water, they open up and the plant can lose water and it's not an issue. When the plant does not have enough water, it wilts due to lack of water pressure, and that causes the guard cells to close. Okay, so they seal up here. No air is going to get out of there, no water vapor is going to get out of there. So that prevents the plant from losing more water. So this is an example of feedback inhibition, which is something that's talked about in several chapters. If there is enough water, it keeps the plant guard cells open so that it's able to lose water. And as soon as the plant doesn't have enough water, that's what shuts it down so that it can't lose any more water. So that's a great example of feedback inhibition. And that was actually just another short section about the leaves. So we have a review question about leaves. So which of the following happens when the plant has plenty of water? So you should see your options on the screen. All right, great job, everybody. We got all our answers quick, and they are all correct. When the plant has plenty of water, the guard cells open it. Again, that allows the water to leave, and that's fine because the plant's happy, it's got enough water. Again, it only closes when the plant starts wilting because it doesn't have enough water, so that's what happens here. When the plant has water and this opens, that's transpiration happening. So when it's open, the transpiration is continuing, so that's not right. It doesn't stop. And photosynthesis is not really directly related, so that's not your correct answer either. So this is the only correct one. The guard cells open the stomata, and that allows transpiration to happen. And the last section in this chapter is about transport. So how does water get from the ground all the way up to the tops of trees? There's a few things that work in combination to make this happen. So first of all, you've got root pressure. Remember, that's the water being pumped from the dermis into the vascular tissue, and as more of it gets pumped in, it starts pushing the water upwards into the tissue. Then also, the leaves are losing water by transpiration. So as the water molecules move out of the leaves, they're actually pulling on the water molecules below them. So this is something that you probably learned about way earlier in the biology book. So the hydrogen bonds in the water molecules attract water molecules to each other, and this is called cohesion. So the water vapor is leaving, it's pulling water molecules behind it, and those are pulling on the ones under them, and they're pulling on the ones under them, and it's kind of a chain reaction all the way down the vascular tissue. Meanwhile, the water molecules below are also attracted to the walls of the xylem above them. This is called adhesion. So the cohesion and the adhesion and the root pressure all work together to move water up the trunk of the tree. And this whole process of those three things working together is called capillary action. So that is a big important idea. And it's based on these things working together. The root pressure from below, the cohesion, the water molecules pulling on the ones under them, and adhesion, being the water molecules attracted to the walls of the xylem above them. And that's all called capillary action. A capillary action is something you can actually see in other places. If you spill some water on the floor or the counter and you dunk a paper towel into it, you could see the water slowly creep up the paper towel. And that's doing the exact same thing as it is here. There's little channels in that paper towel, and the water molecules are being pushed up by the pressure of the puddle of water below them, and they're attracted to the walls of the little channels in the paper towel. And another example of it would be when you get the bottom of your pants wet in a puddle, and before long the water has moved a few inches up the leg of your pants. And this example is a little bit extreme, but you might only step into the water up to this deep, but then the water is going to slowly travel up the leg. And you can see it on this pants too. It went all the way up that height. So that's capillary action. The water is being drawn up through the channels in the fibers of the pants. Okay, but for our purposes, it's also how the plant goes up the entire tree, or other plants. I focus on trees because they're so big that they need a lot of capillary action, but any plant that is more than an inch or two high is also really relying on those three things working together for capillary action. And the last thing they talk about in this section is moving the nutrients around the plant. So not just water, the sugars or other nutrients need to be moved around to the different locations in the plant. So the sugars are moved into the sieve tubes in the plant using active transport across the cell membranes. So again, that's just the cell membranes using energy to move something from one side of the membrane to the other. Doing this changes the concentration of solutions on each side of the membranes, so the water molecules also move in by osmosis. So let's just stop there and review that idea. So the sugars are moved across the membranes by active transport, and because the sugars moved, it changed the concentration. So that is going to make osmosis happen. That makes the water move to try to balance out the concentration that just changed. So what's happening is because the sugar moved, a lot of water also comes inside of these tubes, and that also increases the pressure. So because there's more pressure, the whole solution of nutrients and water gets moved throughout the plant. Okay, so by moving the sugar across the membranes, we changed the concentration, which made osmosis happen, and that moved all the water inside, so now there's high pressure. So this whole explanation, when you put it together, is called the pressure flow hypothesis. And that's the best explanation we have for how nutrients and water get to be moved around the plant. So that brings us to our last review question. Which of the following are true? And this one is multiple answers, and I think this time you actually can click all of the answers that are correct. Yes, you can. So take your time and read through. Click each one that's true. And I see we're almost at 100%. I'm going to give another 10 seconds or so for the last person to vote. Oh, we got it. Okay. Okay, so we got some interesting results here. A lot of people said this one and this one, and then some people said this one and this one, and no one said this one. All right. So our actual answer is that every one of these is true. So this is a little bit of a trick question. Sorry. I promise there's no trick questions like that on the test. There's only one right answer for each one. But for here, they're all true. So transpiration helps drive water movement. Definitely true. Remember, because the water is evaporating, it's pulling the other water behind it. Root pressure helps drive water movement. So we know we talked about that way earlier, but root pressure is the water from the roots being pushed into the vascular system, so it starts to push it upward. Capillary action helps drive water movement, so we talked about a lot about that. And then these last two are related to the pressure flow hypothesis that we just talked about. So I know it's a little bit confusing, but that's okay. Just go back and review that one a little more. So concentration changes in water affect the movement of sugars. So part of that hypothesis, the pressure flow hypothesis we talked about on the last slide, is that as water moves in, it creates a lot of pressure, and so it can move the sugars. It can push the sugars throughout the plant. So that one is also true. And this last one, concentration changes of nutrients affect the movement of both nutrients and water. That's also true. So we talked about how when there's more nutrients inside of the cells, it makes the water move by osmosis because the water wants to balance out that concentration. So that's a really tough concept. I'm actually just going to go back to that slide for just a second. But overall, good job on that one. Um, so again, the sugars moving makes the water move, and then the water moving makes the whole thing of the sugars and the water move together. And that whole thing is called pressure flow hypothesis. So it might be explained a little more clearly in the book. Definitely look up that topic and read about it. And that's all that I have. That was actually the entire chapter. It's kind of a short chapter, but it has a lot of stuff in it. So I'm going to stick around for a few minutes. You can ask questions. Definitely do that. If you want me to go back over anything, I can. If you have other questions about this chapter, just ask. Again, just type them in the questions area on GoToWebinar. And if you're watching a recording of this later, these are how you can contact your instructor by email or by phone.